Our building has obviously gone through a very hard time, and one of the things I think I would like to do now is to suggest that it's actually burnt out. We can see in this picture a very heavy application of soot that's come out one of these windows, and we're going to try and simulate that on our model. The first colour I'm going to put on actually isn't black. We're going to use some dark brown because we want to give this a multi-layered look as well, and the edges of the soot sometimes look more brown than black. So with this brown loaded in the airbrush, I'm going to start by doing a vertical pattern up from these windows. That'll probably do for the brown. Now I'm just going to put some Tamiya flat black straight into the airbrush cup. Thin it with a little bit of their acrylic thinners. My lazy and quick ways of mixing is to put my finger over the end and let it bubble through. Then we have a near black mix because there was a little bit of brown remaining in the cup. And it's onto the model with this. What I want to try and do here is to keep the black in the centre and allow the brown to remain up the edges. To gauge the final effect, we'll hairdry that off to see how it looks when it's dry. There we have it, two very simple steps creating a burnt out effect on the face of a building. Now it's time to paint in shutters, which in this case are cast integrally with the plaster building. And first thing to do is to mask them off. I'm using Tamiya tape here, which is extremely useful for this job. It's low tack, very flexible, so it shouldn't lift the paint from below, but it will stay on for long enough for our purposes. I'll build up a frame of the masking tape first around the area I want to go, and then just fill in behind it to blank it off. The tape's flexible enough to allow me to place it over the front and actually just push it around to cover the little bit of stone that's still showing on the inside edge of the frames here. And that'll just protect that enough from the airbrush so that it doesn't get coated with the metallic finish we're going to use. It helps if you're precise, but like anything in these modelling techniques, if you make a little mistake, we can always go back in and hand paint and retouch. And further weathering techniques will actually obliterate most overspray anyway. With our nice precise Tamiya masking tape frames in place, you can back it up with some cheaper material. We don't want to waste our reasonably expensive Tamiya masking tape doing this. I'm going to use Revell number 91 to paint the shutters. Metallic paints in enamel form airbrush slightly better than the acrylic equivalents. Pick up some of the paint with our pipette, which gives us maximum control, and straight into the airbrush cup. This is slightly thicker than the acrylics we've been using, so it does take a little while longer. Humble enamel thinners, and again, lazy man's mixing technique. Blow air back through the paint cup. I'm actually going to turn the air pressure down a bit here so that the paint doesn't go everywhere, because metallic does tend to settle on the adjacent areas. And let's try this out. Perhaps a little more air. Key to success with using metallics is to build up a nice wet layer of paint so that the metallic pigments can flow into each other and create a film to simulate the metallic look. If it's too dry, it will just look powdery and unrealistic. Having established the basic metallic colour on our metal shutters, we're now going to try and simulate a galvanised appearance. I'm going to take some cellulose thinners, sometimes known as lacquer thinner, only really need a small amount, and then a tiny amount of Tamiya flat white, which will mix with cellulose thinners, just to create a very, very light colour wash. You can see how thin that is. It's just like a stain. And using this particular airbrush, which has a very, very adjustable air control, I've dialed the pressure right down to almost as low as it will go, so that all we're getting from the airbrush is a very, very faint spatter. And using this, I'm going to apply it onto our shutters. Now maybe you can tell by the almost complete lack of air sound coming through the airbrush how low I've got the pressure set. We're just drifting this spotty pattern over the metallic paint. Cellulose thinner just attacks it enough, and the white, when it dries, will just about be apparent to make a slightly different shade of metallic grey. I'm going to apply it to this end shutter as well. Just a very faint mottled pattern. It's quite subtle and perhaps not that apparent on camera, but it is there and it does look rather like galvanising. To vary the colours a bit on our building, I've decided to paint in one of our shutters in a pale green. And for this, I'm going to use Vallejo Green Zinc Chromate. I'm going to lighten it with some light grey. I'm not going to put a solid coat on because I want to remove some of this to suggest some further paint damage. So I'm just going to drift a light layer on. That's actually enough. With our very thin layer of green on, I'm going to try and suggest some extreme paint chipping now by putting on a piece of parcel tape, pressing it over, rubbing it down and pulling it off quickly. It gives a very scraped and chipped appearance to that shutter, I think just as how it would appear in reality.